The ink on the conquered invitation had barely dried when the Vreth started laughing. It was not the loud kind of laughter. It was the quiet kind, the kind shared between people who believe they already know how something ends. The Vreth ambassador, Scrath, sat at the far end of the circular table inside Concord Station and watched the human delegation walk through the main doors. 3 people, 2 aides and 1 diplomat. No guards, no weapons display, no ceremonial armor or rank insignia. Just a woman in a plain gray suit carrying a folder of paper documents. Actual paper. Scrath's mandibles clicked twice. The sound meant amusement in his language. Station itself was enormous. It had been built generations ago to host species from 40 different worlds. The ceilings were tall enough for the Gorath, whose stone-gray bodies stood nearly 3 times the height of a human. The air was a carefully balanced mixture that served lungs, gill slits, and breathing membranes equally. The floor was smooth and wide. The lighting was adjusted to serve eyes that saw in ranges from deep infrared to high ultraviolet. Everything about the station said, "All are welcome here." The humans sat down at their assigned section of the table. It was the smallest section, closest to the door, furthest from the main speaker's position. This had not been an accident. Ava Reed placed her folder on the table and looked around the room once. She noted the seating. She noted the distance. She said nothing about either. She sat down, opened her folder, and read quietly while the other delegations finished their arrival rituals. Gorath Elder Dern took his seat with the slow, grinding certainty of a boulder finding its resting place. His people said nothing during arrivals. They simply existed in the space they occupied, and that was enough. The Dulari delegation arrived in a group of 5, their pale green skin catching the light, their large amber eyes moving quickly across every face in the room. The Dulari were watchers. They collected information the way other species collected territory. The session chair called the room to order. Agenda items were read aloud: border disputes, resource rights, transit corridor negotiations, the usual material of galactic politics. Ava Reed listened and took notes on her paper with a small pen. One of the Vreth junior staff leaned toward another and whispered something. The other one clicked quietly in response. They were looking at the pen. 3 hours passed. The session moved slowly, as these sessions always did. Species with different concepts of time and urgency rarely agreed on packing. The Gorath believed that any decision made in less than a full planetary rotation was a reckless decision. The Vreth believed that speed itself was a form of dominance. The humans sat in the middle of this and waited their turn. When Ava Reed was finally called to present the human position on transit corridor rights, she stood and spoke for exactly 7 minutes. Her points were clear. Her language was simple. She had data to support each claim and she cited each source by name. When she finished, she sat down. Scrath responded by talking for 40 minutes about why human claims in that region of space were historically invalid, legally questionable, and practically irrelevant. He used a vocabulary designed to confuse rather than communicate. He referenced treaty clauses from 200 years ago that had been written specifically to limit species that had not yet achieved interstellar travel. He smiled, in the way that his species smiled, with a slow spreading of the forward mandibles. Ava Reed wrote something in her folder. 40 minutes became 3 hours. The session ground forward. Then, near the end of the scheduled block, a human aide entered the chamber from the side door. He was young. His face was the kind of still that comes not from calm but from training. He walked directly to Ava Reed and placed a sealed message on the table beside her hand. He did not speak. He stepped back and waited. Ava Reed finished the sentence she was writing. Then she picked up the message and read it. Her face did not change. The message was 11 lines long. It contained confirmed sensor data, identification codes, and a timestamp. 2 human colony ships, the Arden and the Caro, had been destroyed near the Vreth border. The debris fields had been analyzed. The weapon signatures matched Vreth military vessels. A secondary data packet showed encrypted communication logs between Vreth Command and a Gorath relay station. The attack had been coordinated. 60,000 people. Ava Reed set the message down on top of her folder. She looked at the center of the table for a moment, at nothing in particular. Then she looked up. Scrath was still speaking. He was making a point about mineral extraction zones. He had not noticed the aide's entry. He had not noticed the message. He was gesturing with 2 of his 6 limbs for emphasis, and his staff was nodding. Ava Reed waited for him to finish his sentence. When he paused for breath, she closed her folder, stood up, and spoke in a voice that was completely flat and completely clear. "You have 3 days to return our dead. After that, we stop talking." She picked up her folder. Her 2 aides were already standing. The 3 of them walked to the door in the same unhurried way they had walked in. The door closed behind them without a sound. The chamber was silent for 4 full seconds. Then Scrath's mandibles spread wide, and the clicking sound began. It spread to his staff. It spread to 2 of the junior Vreth observers near the wall. Even one of the Gorath delegation made a low, rumbling sound that served the same purpose. They were laughing because a species that had arrived with paper documents, and a small pen had just tried to give them a deadline. At the Dulari table, Pereth did not laugh. She was watching the door where the humans had exited. She was writing something in her own notes. Her senior colleague glanced at what she wrote and frowned. She had written, "They did not look angry." The Vreth ran every sensor array. They had pointed at human space for 3 days, and found absolutely nothing worth reporting. That was the problem. Ket was the lead analyst at Vreth Intelligence Station 9. She had been doing this work for 16 years. She knew what a military buildup looked like. She knew the signatures, increased energy output near shipyards, sudden drops in civilian freight traffic as vessels were redirected, communication spikes between command nodes, supply convoys moving towards staging points. She knew all of it. She had been trained to find it even when someone tried to hide it. Human space showed none of those things. What it showed was ordinary. A bulk or freighter leaving the 3rd asteroid belt on its scheduled run. 2 colony transports moving at standard cruise speed toward a settlement 4 light-years out. Merchant vessels on the same routes they had been on for years. A small science ship parked near a gas giant, doing whatever science ships did. Communication traffic was normal. Energy readings were normal. The shipyards were producing at their usual rate, which was not impressive by any galactic standard. Ket filed her report and sent it up the chain. Admiral Scrath read it at his desk and felt his earlier amusement deepen into something more comfortable. Certainty. He had been right. The humans were bluffing. They had made a dramatic exit from the summit because they had nothing else. No fleet to threaten. No alliance to call on. No history of warfare at an interstellar scale. They were a species that had barely reached the stars before the Conquered had found them and extended a membership invitation out of something closer to pity than respect. And now their little diplomat had walked out of a room and said 3 days as if words were the same thing as weapons. Scrath issued a public statement that afternoon. It went out across Vreth diplomatic channels and was picked up quickly by Conquered news services. The statement called humanity's ultimatum a performance. It called the 3-day deadline a misunderstanding of how galactic politics actually functioned. It suggested that the human delegation might benefit from additional training before their next participation in a summit of this scale. The statement was polite in the technical sense. In every other sense, it was a door slamming. The response from humanity's diplomatic office was a single line, "Noted." On the 4th day, a data packet arrived at Vreth Command. It had been sent from a human relay point at the edge of the border zone. The packet contained 3 pieces of information, a set of coordinates, a timestamp 48 hours in the future, and 3 words. "We are coming." Ket read the packet twice and then sat with it for a while. She pulled up her sensor data again. She ran the scans back through the previous 72 hours, this time looking not for military signatures but for something else. Absence, gaps, places where civilian traffic had been consistent enough to be used as cover. She found 17 cargo vessels that had made minor course corrections in the last 2 days. Individually, each correction was explainable: a route adjustment for fuel efficiency, a detour around a debris field, standard navigational variants. But when she mapped all 17 corrections together on a single chart, they all pointed in the same direction. She sat with that for a longer while. Then she pulled the technical specifications on human cargo vessels: standard class, nothing classified, public registry information available to any conquered member. She read the hull rating. She read it again. She cross-referenced it with VRETH military vessel ratings for comparison. The number she was looking at was wrong. It had to be wrong. A civilian freight hauler should not have hull integrity ratings that exceeded a VRETH destroyer-class warship. That was not how civilian ships worked. Civilian ships were built cheap and fast. They cut weight wherever possible to maximize cargo capacity. They were not built to survive sustained weapons fire. No civilian ship from any species was built to survive sustained weapons fire. She found the answer in a footnote in the registry. Human cargo ships operated in routes that crossed regions of space with high radiation density, unpredictable solar activity, and debris fields from a historically unstable star cluster near their home system. The hull ratings were not military specifications. They were survival specifications. The ships had been built that way because the alternative was losing crews to the environment every few years, and humanity had apparently decided that was not acceptable. She looked at the 17 course corrections again. She wrote her new report. It was longer than the previous one. She flagged it urgent and sent it directly to Scrath with a personal note attached that said simply, "We may have read this situation incorrectly." Scrath read the report 3 hours later. He set it down. He looked at the coordinates from the data packet. He looked at the timestamp. He told himself that hull ratings were not weapons, that a cargo ship was still a cargo ship, that 17 course corrections did not constitute a fleet action. He ordered his home fleet to deploy to the coordinates anyway, just to be present, just to make a point, just to show the humans what a real military response looked like, so they would understand the difference between arriving and arriving prepared. Far out in the dark between stars, the 17 ships continued on their adjusted courses. They were running with minimal external lighting. Their crews were not nervous. They had been running drills in the sealed interior compartments for 3 days. They moved through their tasks the way people move through work they have done many times before, efficiently, without wasted motion, without drama. One of the crew members, a young man named Rio, was eating a meal in the narrow galley when the shift officer knocked on the frame and told him to gear up. Rio finished his last bite, put the container away in its secured rack, and stood up. He had questions the way most people have questions before something difficult. He just did not ask them out loud. VRETH Admiral Scrath had never lost a battle. He had studied 42 naval engagements across VRETH history and pulled lessons from every one of them. He had run simulations against every major species in the Conquered. He had won all of them. When his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the designated coordinates and his sensors showed him what was waiting, he felt something very close to relief. 17 ships, cargo class, battered hulls, running lights dim. They were arranged in a loose column rather than any recognizable combat formation. Some of them looked like they had been repainted recently and not very carefully. One was visibly dragging a piece of loose external equipment that swung slowly on a cable. Scrath counted his own ships, 41 vessels, 3 destroyer-class, 8 cruisers, the rest frigates and support craft, all military-built, all crewed by trained personnel, all carrying weapons designed specifically for ship-to-ship combat at range. He opened a channel to the human column and broadcast on the standard Conquered frequency. "You are outmatched," he said. Turn back and this engagement does not have to happen. That is the only offer I will make. The response came back in 11 seconds, a human voice, calm and unhurried. We're not here to negotiate. We're here because you owe us 60,000 dead. Stand down or we begin. Scrath closed the channel. He ordered his fleet to open fire. The first volley was precise. 12 ships targeted the lead human vessel simultaneously. The energy output was enough to reduce a standard freighter to debris. The shots hit. The human ship lit up across its entire hull, visible even on visual sensors as a bloom of transferred energy. It did not break apart. It did not lose thrust. It continued forward. Scrath stared at his damage assessment readout. The system was recalculating. It showed impacts. It showed heat transfer. It showed hull stress readings that were high but not critical. The ship was still intact. He ordered a second volley, then a third. The human column kept moving. Then the humans fired back. They did not fire at random. Every shot from every human ship was targeted with a specificity that took Scrath's tactical officer 3 seconds to identify as intentional. They were hitting engines and communication arrays only. Not weapons, not crew sections, not fuel systems, just the parts that made his ships move and talk to each other. 4 of his frigates went dark and drifted, not destroyed, just stopped. The human ships closed the distance. When they were within boarding range, they did something Scrath had never seen in any simulation. They extended physical docking connectors, old technology, cable and clamp systems, the kind of thing used in civilian emergencies when electronic docking failed. They pulled themselves against Vreth hulls one by one and held there. The boarding teams were small, 6 to 8 people per entry point. They moved in suits that looked like the same survival gear human civilians wore in harsh environments, thick, flexible, designed for pressure and temperature extremes. They carried tools that could open airlocks from outside. They did not breach the hulls violently. They opened doors. They walked in. Scrath's crew fought back. The interior corridors became close-quarters engagements. The humans absorbed injuries that should have slowed them and did not slow them. One human boarder on the security footage took a direct strike from a Vreth stun weapon and kept moving for another 4 minutes before sitting down. When a Vreth soldier came to finish the engagement, the human looked up and said something in its language. The translation system rendered it as, "Can you give me 30 seconds? I just need 30 seconds." The Vreth soldier, to his own apparent confusion, waited. The engagement lasted 11 minutes from the first shot to the last. At the end of it, most of Scrath's crew was alive, disarmed, seated in their own corridors with their hands visible. The dead numbered 22 Vreth, 15 humans. The disparity was not what Scrath would have expected. He had expected the humans to take the heavier losses. They had been the smaller force. He was escorted to a human vessel, not roughly. They walked him through a clean corridor that smelled like recycled air and something that might have been food. He was put in a room that had a table, 2 chairs, a light, and a cup of water sitting on the surface. He sat there and thought about the 30-second request from the boarding footage. His tactical mind kept returning to it. A soldier in the middle of combat, injured, asking an enemy for 30 seconds, and the enemy giving it. That was not trained behavior. That was not a calculated tactical decision. That was something else. He did not have a word for it in Vreth. The door opened, and the young human named Rio came in. He sat across from Scrath and set another cup of water on the table, this time on Scrath's side. Scrath looked at the cup. "What is this?" "Water," Rio said. "You've been sitting in here a while." "We were just in combat." "I know. You lost people." Rio looked at the table for a moment. "Yes. And you are giving me water." Rio looked up. His expression was not warm exactly, but it was not cold either. It was the expression of someone doing a job they had thought about carefully before agreeing to do it. "We're sending you home," he said. "You and most of your crew, the ships that can still fly." You'll take back with you. Scrath's mandibles moved slowly. Why? Rio was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Because we want you to go home and tell them what happened here. All of it, exactly as it happened." Scrath looked at him for a long time. "This is a message." "Yes," Rio said. "What is the message?" Rio stood up and moved to the door. He paused with one hand on the frame and looked back. "That we came when we said we would. That we did what we said we would. And that this is what it looks like when we hold back." He left. The door stayed unlocked. Scrath sat with the cup of water and did not drink it for a long time. He was thinking about the gap between what he had expected and what had happened. He was thinking about 11 minutes. He was thinking about the word hold back and everything it implied about what the other option looked like. Outside, through the small viewport in the corner of the room, he could see his ships being released one by one, drifting free, their running lights coming back on slowly as minimal power was restored. Heading home. He picked up the cup and drank. The footage played 17 times in the Galactic Concord emergency chamber before someone finally asked them to stop replaying it. It was Gorath Elder Dern who asked, not because he found it disturbing, though he did. He asked because he had already memorized every second of it and further viewing was no longer producing new information. He had been sitting in his stone-gray bulk at the far end of the chamber table for 6 hours, and in that time he had said almost nothing. This was not unusual for Dern. What was unusual was that he had not moved once. Even Gorath fidgeted eventually. Dern had not. The Dulari strategist presenting the analysis, a senior officer named Vel, pulled up the timeline graphic instead. 11 minutes displayed as a horizontal bar, color-coded by event type. He walked through it again for the benefit of the newer delegates. First contact. Vreth fleet opens fire at range. 3 volleys. Human ships do not break. 2 minutes and 40 seconds in. Humans return fire. Target selection limited to propulsion and communications only. 4 minutes in. Boarding begins. 11 minutes. Engagement ends. Vreth fleet neutralized, crew majority alive, human boarding teams withdraw. Vel paused at that last point. "We ran projections on the engagement," he said. "Based on the weapons output we observed from the human vessels and the hull ratings we have now confirmed, our models show the human force was capable of destroying the Vreth fleet in approximately 3 minutes. They chose instead to spend 11 minutes ensuring most of the opposing crew survived." Someone from the smaller delegate section, near the back, asked why that mattered. Dern answered before Vel could. His voice was slow and heavy, like something being moved that weighed a great deal. "It matters because they spent 8 extra minutes taking losses to preserve the enemy," he said. 8 minutes in which 15 more of their own people could have lived if they had simply chosen destruction. They did not choose destruction. That is not a tactical decision. That is a values decision. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Dern excused himself from the session and met privately with his counsel in one of the station's secondary rooms. The room was not large enough for comfort by Gorath standards, but no one mentioned it. His intelligence chief, a quiet Gorath named Bren, placed a data tablet on the table. The full survey report on human-controlled space. Bren had ordered it 3 months ago as a routine assessment of a new member species. It had come back flagged with a priority marker that Bren had not been certain how to interpret at the time. He understood it now. Dern read through the key findings. Every human settlement above a population of 2,000 had structural layouts that matched defensive fortification patterns. Not military bases, ordinary towns and cities. But the buildings were positioned to provide overlapping fields of observation. The road systems allowed rapid population movement in multiple directions. The underground infrastructure was reinforced well beyond what water and power systems required. It was not that humans had built defenses. It was that they had built survival into every ordinary thing they made, and survival, at sufficient scale, was indistinguishable from fortification. The second finding was the population number. Earth's documented population, cross-referenced against their training records and civilian emergency response protocols, yielded a figure. Dern looked at it. He had his aide check the calculation twice. The number was correct. The mobilizable human population from their home planet alone exceeded the combined standing military forces of every conquered member species by a factor of 40. Not their military, their civilians, the people who worked in mines and on farms and in shipping yards, the people who had been going through emergency response drills since childhood as a standard educational requirement, the people who crewed cargo ships rated for conditions that destroyed Vreth warships. Bren was watching Dern's face. Dern was not easy to read. His features did not move quickly, but Bren had served under him for 30 years and he could see what was there. Dern set the tablet down. He looked at the wall for a while. Then he said, "We will not be retaliating." No one in the room argued. No one asked for clarification. Bren collected the tablet and the council members filed out without discussion. Back in the main chamber, Parath sat in her junior observer seat and watched the delegations return from their recesses one by one. She had been taking notes since the session began, but she had written very little of the procedural content. She had been writing observations instead. The Vreth ambassador Scrath had returned from the engagement and was present via remote transmission, which meant the camera caught every small movement of his mandibles. He was not clicking. He had not clicked once since the footage began playing. For a Vreth, that stillness in the mandibles was a specific kind of quiet. She wrote, "He is not angry. He is recalibrating." She thought about her paper, the one she had been drafting for 2 months. She had been struggling with the central argument. She had the data. She had the historical analysis. What she had not been able to articulate was the why. Why did humanity process violence and mercy as a paired response rather than as opposites? Every species she had studied treated them as a scale. More of one meant less of the other. Humanity seemed to operate on a different axis entirely. She thought about the footage, about the soldier who asked an enemy for 30 seconds and the enemy who gave it, about the cup of water on a table in a brig, about 15 humans who died to make sure more Vreth survived. She thought about a planet that produced volcanoes and megapredators and ice ages and microscopic organisms specifically designed to kill complex life, and the species that had lived on it for hundreds of thousands of years, and learned to look at everything that shared the world with them and ask first, can this be something other than an enemy? She opened her paper draft and found the right sentence finally. They did not learn mercy in spite of their world. They learned it because of it. Nobody announced her. That was the thing people kept mentioning afterward, in the reports and the recorded testimonies and the informal conversations that spread across the Concord network in the weeks that followed. There was no formal re-entry request, no scheduled time slot, no security detail or advance notice to the session chair. Ava Reed simply appeared in the doorway of the main chamber, while the Concord was mid-session on an unrelated trade dispute, and the room noticed her the way a room notices when the temperature drops. She was wearing the same gray suit. She walked to the human delegation section, the small one near the door, and set a single document on the table. Not her section's table, the center table, the one reserved for formal submissions to the full assembly. She placed it flat, smoothed it once with her hand, and stepped back. The session chair, a Dulari senior member named Orath, looked at the document and then at Ava Reed. The human delegation has not been scheduled for. I'm not here to speak, Ava Reed said. I'm here to leave that. She moved back to her seat and sat down. She folded her hands on the table and waited. Orath sent an aide to collect the document. Copies were made and distributed to each delegation. What they received was not what any of them had been expecting. It was a list of names. 60,214 names, printed in small type to fit the pages, organized by vessel, the Ardent first. Then the Caro, Each name had a short line beside it, not a biography, not a eulogy, just a line, what they had been doing before the journey: a teacher, a structural engineer, a child age 7 listed as passenger dependent, a retired hydrologist who had taken the trip to help establish water systems on the new settlement, a pair of siblings ages 19 and 22 listed one after the other. The list went on for a long time. At the bottom there was a total. Below the total a heading that read, Resolution Options. Option 1 was detailed and specific. Full restitution calculated to the nearest economic unit, covering the ship's cargo, and a figure assigned to each life lost according to conquered wrongful death standards. Return of all territory seized in the border zone over the previous 4 years. 3 human observers, with full access rights, stationed on each responsible homeworld for a period of 20 years. A formal conquered record acknowledging the attack as deliberate and unprovoked. Option 2 had nothing beneath it, just a blank space, 3 centimeters of empty white page. The Vreth ambassador Scrath, still appearing by remote transmission with his mandibles motionless, looked at the blank space for a long time. His legal counsel leaned toward him and began speaking quietly. Scrath did not appear to be listening. One of the Goreth delegation members made a sound low in the chest, not words, just a sound. Parath, in her observer seat, was watching Ava read. The human diplomat was looking at a fixed point on the center table, not at the delegates, not at the screen showing the document. She was looking at the table surface with the particular focus of someone who is managing something internal with a great deal of deliberate effort. Parath wrote in her notes, "She has been carrying those names since the day she read the message." Scrath's legal counsel finished speaking. Scrath made a small motion with one limb that in Vreth body language indicated dismissal. He looked at the blank space again. Then he looked at Ava Reed. "What is the second option?" he said. Ava Reed looked up from the table. She looked at him directly. She did not answer. The blank space answered for her. Goreth Elder Dern, who had been present in person for this session and had not spoken for the first 2 hours, leaned forward slightly. The motion was small, but it moved a great deal of mass, and everyone in the room registered it. "I would like to call the vote," he said. Oreth looked at the room. "Is there any delegate who requires additional time to review the document before voting?" No one spoke. "Then we will vote on option 1 as presented." The vote was called. It passed with enough margin that the count itself was not dramatic. Scrath's transmission feed showed his stylus moving to the signature line on the formal acceptance. His hand was not steady. The signature was slightly uneven. The document was countersigned by the Goreth representative and the session chair and formally entered into conquered record. Ava Reed stood. She collected the signed original copy from the center table. She looked at it for a moment, just a brief moment, and then put it into her folder. She nodded once at the room in general, not at any specific person, and walked to the door. In the corridor outside, she stopped. She put one hand flat against the wall and stood there. Her aide, the young man who had brought her the message on the day the ships were destroyed, stood a few steps away and waited. He did not speak. He had worked with her long enough to know when not to. After a moment, she straightened up and started walking again. "Get me on the first transport home," she said. "Already booked," he said. "Leaves in 4 hours." She nodded. They walked. The corridor was wide and bright and built for 40 different species, and the only sound was their footsteps on the smooth floor. Inside the chamber behind them, the session had already moved on to the next agenda item. The Conquered continued at its usual pace, as it always did, processing the shape of what had just happened into official record and moving forward. The 60,214 names went into that record too, not as a footnote, as the first line of the resolution. Oreth had made that decision himself quietly before the session resumed. He was not sure why it had felt important to him. He was Dulari. He collected information. He recorded things carefully. He thought it was important that the names came first. Parath's paper was 31 pages long, and it broke something loose in the galaxy that had not been loose before. She had not expected that. She had written it carefully, in the measured academic language of her field, with citations and source data and appropriate hedging language in the conclusions. She had submitted it to the Dulari Journal of Xenosociology because that was the correct venue for work of that type. She had expected it to be read by perhaps 200 scholars and generate a small amount of professional correspondence. Within 6 weeks, it had been translated into 41 languages. The original Dulari text had been downloaded from the journal's public archive over 9 million times. The paper was titled, "The Kindness of Deathworlders, a Study of Mercy as Survival Mechanism in Homo sapiens." The central argument was simple enough that it could be stated in one sentence, which was perhaps why it spread so quickly. Humanity was not frightening because they were violent, but because they were violent and merciful at the same time, in proportions, and with a consistency that no other species had demonstrated across its recorded history. And this was not a contradiction but a direct product of the world that had made them. Parath had chapters on Earth's ecology, predator density per square kilometer, annual casualty figures from non-sapient animal encounters over the course of human development, climate events, disease, seismic activity. She had a chapter specifically about the ocean, which she had titled simply, "The Water," and which several reviewers had described as the most unsettling piece of academic writing they had encountered in their careers. It was a straightforward ecological summary of what lived in Earth's seas. Nothing was editorialized. The facts were sufficient. She had a chapter on human conflict history. Not a condemnation, she was careful about that, and she stated clearly in the introduction that she was not writing a moral judgment. She was writing an analysis. What the conflict history showed when graphed across millennia was a species that fought constantly and hard and with genuine ferocity, and simultaneously developed within the same historical periods increasingly elaborate systems for protecting noncombatants, treating the wounded on both sides, and establishing rules of engagement designed to limit suffering. Both impulses grew together. Neither canceled the other. The paper's final chapter was about the 11-minute battle and its aftermath. She had testimony from Vreth crew members, gathered through the Concord's official debrief process. She quoted one Vreth engineer who had been in the lower deck section during boarding. The engineer had been injured. A human boarder had stopped in the middle of an active engagement to apply a pressure seal to a wound on the engineer's thorax. The engineer had asked why. The human had said, in broken but understandable standard, "You are not fighting me right now." The engineer had not been fighting because the engineer did not have a weapon. The human had apparently considered this sufficient reason to treat the injury before continuing. Parath's conclusion was that this behavior was not strategic. It was not performed for tactical advantage or diplomatic purposes. It was, by all evidence, simply what humans did when they encountered something that was hurting and not actively threatening them. The circuitry for it ran too deep and operated too automatically to be anything other than genuine. She wrote, "They did not learn mercy in spite of their world. They learned it because of it. A species that survives by killing learns to kill well. A species that survives by also cooperating, also protecting, also tending to the injured stranger, that species learns something more complex. Earth did not give humanity an easy life. Earth gave humanity a complete education." The responses came from everywhere. A Vreth military academy requested permission to include the paper in their strategic analysis curriculum. A Gorath engineering collective sent a message asking whether Parath would be willing to consult on a project to study human construction methods. The Concord's Committee on New Member Species Integration quietly updated their assessment protocols for humanity's status from provisional to full. Rio by this point had been aboard the Dulari research vessel searching current for 2 months. His assignment as the first human liaison officer to a Dulari crew had been arranged through the new cooperation agreement, partly as a symbolic gesture, and partly because someone in human diplomatic circles had decided that Rio specifically was the right person for the job. He had learned 40 words of conversational Dulari. He was working on a fifth card game variant that accounted for the fact that Dulari had 4 hands and could hold significantly more cards than humans. He had twice been brought into the ship's laboratory section to consult on samples from a debris field, because the Dulari science team had noticed that his ability to pattern match structural irregularities was faster than their scanner software, and they had not yet decided whether to be impressed or concerned about this. One evening in the ship's common area, a Dulari crew member named Sale sat across from him and asked, with genuine curiosity, whether humans were always calm in the way he seemed to be calm. Rio thought about it. "Not always," he said, "but I think we practice it." Sale asked what they practiced for. Rio was quiet for a moment. He looked at the card game spread on the table between them. "There's always something to be calm for," he said. "Something to come back to. If you practice the calm enough, you can hold on to it even when things get loud." Sale considered this for a while, and then asked if he wanted to finish the card game. He did. On Earth, Ava Reed was in her garden when her younger cousin found her. The cousin was 16 and had been following the news about the conquered settlement with the intense focus of a teenager who has recently discovered that the world is larger and stranger than previously understood. She sat on the low wall at the edge of the garden and watched Ava turning soil near the far bed, and finally asked the question she had been holding for 2 weeks. "Were you scared?" Ava kept working for a moment. She moved a section of dark soil and set it aside and looked at what was underneath. Something small was growing there. She worked around it carefully. "I was scared they wouldn't listen," she said. "I was scared we'd have to keep going." Her cousin frowned. "Keep going with what?" Ava didn't answer immediately. She settled the soil back around the small growing thing and stood up and brushed her hands together. She looked at the garden and then at the sky above it, which was ordinary and blue and full of nothing alarming at all. She had read 60,000 names in a message 11 lines long. She had carried them through a negotiation, and a corridor and a transport home, and a garden on a quiet afternoon. She would carry them for the rest of her life. That was simply the nature of the weight. "It doesn't matter now," she said. They listened. She picked up her tools and went inside. The garden was very quiet. Something small kept growing in the soil near the far bed, unhurried, the way things grow when the danger has passed and the ground is good.